I'm Roberta Glass, and you're listening to my True Crime Report. Yesterday, the Texas Court of Appeals granted Rodney Reed a stay of execution. And to talk to me about this stay of execution in the Rodney Reed case is Lisa O'Brien, host of the Clear and Convincing podcast, which airs on Blogtalkradio on Tuesday nights. Welcome, Lisa O'Brien.
Thank you for having me, Roberta.
Thank you so much for talking to me about this. So, what does a stay of execution mean in this case, and why did the Texas Court of Appeals grant one?
Well, the bottom line, I think, is that Reed's attorneys were able to gather and present facially appealing claims, incriminating statements from Jimmy Fennell or alleged incriminating statements from Jimmy Fennell, and questions about whether or not the police withheld information, because one of the aspects is that they're raising more Brady claims. And so the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals is doing what it's supposed to do and giving Reed the due process that he's entitled to develop these claims and, if he can, prove them.
So what's your feeling? I mean, do you feel this is a good thing?
Well, it's a good thing in that it will result in hearings, which will make this public record. It will result in a court looking at the testimony of these witnesses if the Innocence Project puts them on. I think with the relationship witnesses in 2017, they relied on the declarations rather than having those witnesses testify live at a hearing. Okay. And for somebody like me, that shows the weakness of those witnesses.
Can you explain that? Because that's a really important point. What is the difference between making a declaration and being presented as a witness in court?
When you make a declaration, it cannot be cross-examined. When you produce a witness in court and they testify on direct evidence, then the opposing party gets a chance to cross-examine them. That is where usually witnesses fall apart, especially in cases like this.
Yeah, I've heard it being called the engine of truth. And I think it's something that's really negated how powerful cross-examination is. Anyone who followed the O.J. Simpson trial can attest to that. So Reed has had a lot of celebrity support. Kim Kardashian met with Reed, Oprah Winfrey, Beyonce. This stay, the way it's being reported on is that it was granted because of public pressure. Do you agree with that?
Not at all. Because the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals is not one of the entities that they were holding protests in front of, that they were calling every day, that they were harassing, because they've been harassing Governor Abbott, the Board of Pardons and Paroles, Brian Gertz, the Bastrop County DA. They've been harassing these people for months. And the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals wasn't even a blip on their radar.
So you think they're just claiming victory where there really was none?
Correct. They're claiming victory, I think, because they don't understand the system. And actually, the calls to Governor Abbott, the calls to the pardon and paroles, even the calls to Gertz, it's going to have no impact whatsoever on the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, how they decide. And it's going to have no impact on the Bastrop District Court, which will be the one to hold the hearings on these new claims. And the Court of Criminal Appeals remanded 4 categories of claims. And I didn't have a chance to print those and read those yet. So I'm not going to speak to what those were.
Okay.
Although they are Brady claims and the incriminating statements from Fennell.
Interesting. And the Innocence Project says that they want to test more DNA. What do they want tested, and how do you feel about that?
Well, they wanted to test the belt that was used to strangle Stacy. They wanted to test some of the items found in and around the truck when it was discovered in the high school parking lot less than a mile from where Reed was living at the time, and which was the same location he dumped Linda Schluter's car. And basically, Reed will never qualify for DNA testing under the state statute because of the abundance of DNA evidence already linking him to Stacy Stites' rape and murder.
Interesting. And you mentioned, I'm afraid I'm going to mispronounce her name, Linda
Schluter.
Thank you, Schluter. Who was she?
She was a young woman, 19. She was visiting friends in Bastrop. They went to a movie. She apparently, she was from Austin. She was trying to get out of Bastrop, got lost, or trying to find her friends and got lost. And Reed was able to talk his way into her car, where he directed her to a deserted area and then, smashed her face against the steering wheel of her car, tried to abduct her, was going to rape her, was probably going to kill her the way he killed Stacy. But she was able to fight him off and get out of the car, and a vehicle coming down the road scared him, and he took her car and drove away.
Okay. The New York Times, this country's most prestigious newspaper, wrote an article on Rodney Reed, and they failed to mention his history of rape, from his DNA on a 12-year-old girl to the fact that he raped the pregnant mother of his children in front of them. I mean, why is the press leaving this out?
Basically, the story of an innocent man about to be wrongfully executed by the state of Texas is more appealing and sells more papers than the story of a convicted serial rapist murderer who is going to be executed by the state of Texas.
Okay, and there was something going around from the Innocence Project's website, which is called 10 Facts You Need to Know About Rodney Reed, who is scheduled to be executed on November 20th. So that was at the time. They credit the byline as the Innocence Staff. So I just wanted to go 1 through 10 with you and address some of these claims. 1, the murder weapon has never been tested for DNA evidence.
Yes. One of the things about the Innocence Project and most of these pro-Reed sources is they lack an ability to put things in context, and they only report the portions that give the appearance of innocence. So, yes, the murder weapon was never tested for DNA because in 1996, there was no technology for touch DNA, and there were no fluids or stains on the belt that could be swabbed and later subjected to DNA testing.
Okay.
So that's why it wasn't tested in 1996. Now they want to test it for touch DNA. And touch DNA, it's been handled without gloves, which was because there was no touch DNA technology. It's been commingled with other evidence that was handled without gloves. So the potential for having dispositive, conclusive DNA results with touch DNA testing of this belt are slim. In the reality of DNA testing statutes, you have to prove that exculpatory results would change the outcome of your trial. And Reed cannot do that because exculpatory results on the belt, absence of his DNA, unknown DNA, even Jimmy Fennell's DNA would not change the outcome of his trial because he has DNA inside, in Stacy's panties, on her pants, and on her back brace, because stains that could not be tested in 1996 were sufficient to be tested in 2014 and revealed additional DNA from Reed and not DNA from Fennell, who supposedly is the one who really killed her.
Yeah, and I think we'll revisit as we go through that point about the DNA and the Innocence Project's reason that they say that DNA is there and how implausible that is. Number 2, the state's 3 forensic experts have admitted on the record to errors in their testimony, which led to Reed's conviction and death sentence.
Well, that's a misrepresentation of what actually happened. First of all, Dr. Bayardo didn't really admit to, quote, errors. He said the prosecution misused his time of death estimate. And if they told him that they were going to tell the jury what they told the jury, he would have told them that it was wrong. So that's not really admitting an error. The other thing, though, is that Bayardo said, there was no signs of sexual assault. The semen was there with consensual sex, and the injuries that were attributed to anal rape were from penetration with a police baton. Now, Bayardo, first of all, has given interviews in which he has said, look, I don't have any independent memory of any of the autopsies I conducted.
Okay.
and that he's had memory problems over the past several years. I think this was in 2008 or 2009 that KXAN did an expose, because he was a Travis County medical examiner doing autopsies for various counties in and around Central Texas, because they did not have coroners or forensic pathologists of their own. Probably didn't have it in the budget.
Okay.
So he kind of stepped in the way the Arkansas Crime Lab stepped in West Memphis 3.
Okay.
Because Crittenden County did not have a medical examiner, forensic pathologist to do autopsies for deaths occurring in Crittenden County. So they all went to Little Rock to the crime lab. So that's, Bayardo, he didn't really retract. He didn't really admit error. He changed his opinion. But that's really all it was a change of opinion, not based on any new testing, new information. Just basically that's what Rodney Reed's counsel wanted him to say. And I would bet you dollars to donuts that the affidavit was prepared for him by Reed's counsel and he signed it.
Yeah, interesting.
You see that all the time in these cases.
Right, that's true. And so we have 2 more. So what happened with the other 2?
Correct. Karen Blakely was an analyst with Texas Department of Public Safety for their crime lab. She testified at trial regarding her examination of the body at the crime scene, and she's one of the individuals who collected the intact sperm cells from Stacy's body at the crime scene. One of the things that she testified to was the length of time intact sperm, in other words, sperm with heads and tails still attached, could remain viable in a human vagina. Not to be sorry for the graphic language now, but we got to go there. So her studies experience is that you don't find intact sperm longer than 26 hours after intercourse, between intercourse and collection of a sample. And there are several studies that have various ranges, but in reality, they all say 26 hours is about the length of time that it's most commonly found. You can find them after longer periods depending upon temperature conditions. If you have a body, frozen in a snowbank for 16 days, you will probably still find intact sperm in that body, but that's because of the conditions under which the body has been held since death. So what they're basing their claim on is a letter from the Department of Public Safety, the director, Brady Mills, who basically received a letter from the Innocence Project asking him to review Karen Blakely's testimony. And they were requesting a correction of her testimony by DPS. Mr. Mills' response was, I do not believe that Ms. Blakely's testimony constitutes professional negligence or professional misconduct, and thus do not see a basis for the crime lab to report this matter to the Texas Forensic Science Commission, pursuant to Article 38.01, Section 4, Texas Code of Criminal Procedure. The issues raised in your letter have been extensively litigated in this case. We do not see a duty to correct in this matter. However, during our review of the testimony by Ms. Blakely, we noted some potential limitations in the paper she cited during testimony.
Okay.
The Willott paper cited by Ms. Blakely during her testimony concerned a study that was undertaken to determine the amount of time spermatozoa could remain in the body after intercourse. Data for this study was collected from living victims and relied on the victim to correctly estimate the time since the offense occurred. So in reality, it's a potential limitation. He goes on to state that there was a table within the study that reported 72 hours as the longest time for intact spermatozoa to be found in the vagina.
Okay.
And that was a competing study. Now, one of the things that they don't talk about is the fact that the Willott study, the defense used that to cross-examine Karen Blakely.
Okay.
So the jury had the potentially longer period of time.
Oh, that's interesting. So the jury heard that. Okay.
And Dr. Elizabeth Johnson, Reed's expert, also testified to a potentially longer period of time. What they're doing, and they've done it in prior writs, and they did it in the federal habeas writ, just because you have a potential for a longer period of time they have not proven that that longer period of time is applicable to this particular case.
Right.
And they still haven't proven it because they haven't had any witness who put Reed with Stacy a late Sunday night to early Monday morning.
Good point.
At the time he claims. The third expert is Megan Clement. She worked with LabCorp, which then became Bode Cellmark. They also requested a correction from Bode Cellmark. And of course, with state of forensics and accusations about them being made with the innocence fraud movement, a lot of these labs are becoming very knee-jerk about how testimony was stated in the past. And so when they get something from the Innocence Project that says this needs correction, unfortunately, they're not going to stand their ground and say nothing wrong. They're going to give the Innocence Project something to hang its hat on. So what they did was they found not that Megan Clement's testimony was false in any way, but that she made unsatisfactory statements when she testified regarding her experience working with samples from rape kits and when she finds intact sperm.
Okay.
And they said that was outside of her expertise, but I disagree. And I think most courts would disagree because she was talking about her experience, her observations in her work. And that's not something that a layperson can testify to that. That's not specifically expert testimony.
Certainly not. Yeah. Good point.
But again, it doesn't retract the testimony. Megan Clement and Karen Blakely, neither of them has ever said, I was wrong, my testimony was false, I was in error. That has not happened. This is, again, Brady Mills and Stephanie Spivak from Bode Cellmark saying, well, there might have been this little bit of the testimony might have been wrong. We don't think it's really wrong, but maybe she shouldn't have testified that way. And we saw that in Larry Swearingen, where they represented it as the lab, the DPS saying both of those testimonies were false and an error. And in reality, the letter said, well, we wouldn't testify that way now. But at the time, the language used was correct.
Right. Science constantly evolves, right? And the language around it constantly evolves.
It's a lot like the FBI saying that analysts who testified that a hair was consistent with a particular individual were maybe overstating the match or maybe overstating the results of the analysis, which came back to bite them on the ass.
Okay.
So that's not what the DPS or even Bode Cellmark have said. Karen Blakely has never said it. Megan Clement has never said it. So they're misrepresenting not only what the evidence actually is or what was said, but they're misrepresenting what they have to back it up.
I was just thinking about this. I mean, isn't this really like, I don't know how to say it. When we're
semantics.
Semantics, and almost like an advertisement with a lot of small print. And why we're always banging on about reading the court records is because what's being presented as what's in them is often so different than what really happened in court, or how the expert's testimony is being presented, or how it's being sold to the public. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Okay. I would very much agree with that. And they're even misrepresenting, they're linking this to the time of death, when in reality, it's the length of time the sperm could have remained intact.
And we're not talking Alaska, we're talking Texas, right? The hot Texas sun.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's another thing, that they have gone to some historic weather database. And I think they looked at different communities around Bastrop and then took the colder one.
Of course.
Which was, I think, Elgin.
Yeah.
Another thing that's important, though, they're doing this, but they don't have a climatologist doing an affidavit or testifying about this historic climatological data. They are just making the conclusory allegations in their brief, or having their medical examiners make the conclusory allegation in their reports. So this is all extrajudicial. It's not within the court record.
Okay. That's a good point. Number 3. Renowned forensic pathologists, including Michael Baden, Werner Spitz, Leroy Riddick, and Cyril Wecht, have all concluded that Reed's guilt is medically and scientifically impossible.
That is an exaggeration because none of these people can testify that anything is medically and scientifically impossible. If the state were to bring in at a hearing in this case a medical examiner who says it's medically and scientifically impossible for anyone other than Rodney Reed to have killed Stacey Stites, Innocence Project would tear him a new one on cross-examination because that is totally exceeding the bounds of his expertise. Medical examiners can testify within a reasonable degree of medical or scientific certainty. They cannot declare anything to be medically or scientifically impossible because that's not what science does. And in order to do that, they'd have to test that theory. You can't do that. It's an exaggeration.
Okay, and this goes back to the reason that Rodney Reed and the Rodney Reed supporters and the Innocence Project say that Rodney Reed's sperm was found in multiple places on Stacey Stites' body. And so this is number 4. Rodney Reed and Stacey Stites were having a consensual sexual relationship.
Well, they're actually downplaying what DNA was found and where. Their latest claims are, as you saw on Dr. Phil, that he was found guilty based on finding 3 sperm cells. If it had really been an attack at 3:30 in the morning, they would have found millions of sperm cells. They would have found this, that, and the other thing, but the claims that there was a consensual relationship still aren't proven by credible and reliable witnesses. Never have been, and they never will be, because the longer witnesses wait to come forward, the less credible they become.
And you pointed out in the episode that we did together, some problems with some of the people who've come forward, especially the coworker. Now I'm forgetting her name.
Alicia Slater,
who said she was wearing her engagement ring to work, that they met for lunch, which is incompatible with when she worked the night shift because it paid a little bit more. And
correct.
Her lunch would be at the end of her shift. And she never wore her engagement ring to work. I mean, it's really questionable. Also, there was a reward at the time for any
correct.
information.
The biggest problem is that if they had been having a consensual relationship, and if Jimmy Fennell knew about it and this was his motive, why would he not have pointed police toward Rodney Reed in the first place?
Right.
And then the other thing is, one of their early theories, because the DNA was not Fennell's, was that she was having an affair he found out about and killed her. So anybody saying she was having a consensual relationship with Rodney Reed, that would have given them motive for Fennell rather than necessarily going after Rodney Reed. But the biggest thing is Reed's name was not mentioned by any witnesses, her family, Fennell's family, Fennell's friends, because you got to presume they were interviewed during the entire 10-month investigation prior to identifying Rodney Reed's DNA in Stacey Stites and on her body. And so that's always going to just defeat the whole claim of a consensual relationship. As Lisa Tanner said during one of her closings, this relationship was so secret, even Stacey Stites didn't know about it. And that's still true today.
Can you remind the listeners who Jimmy Fennell is?
Jimmy Fennell was a Giddings police officer in Giddings, Texas, where he and Stacey lived. He had worked as a Bastrop County Sheriff's jailer for about 6 months prior to being certified as a law enforcement officer in Texas and getting the job with Giddings PD. He had some allegations in Giddings from 2 individuals, men, one of whom was named Murillo, which could be Hispanic and could be Italian, of excessive force or something along those lines. And the other person's name was Lehman, which doesn't sound very ethnic to me at all. But there were no allegations of domestic violence in his relationship with Stacey. There were no allegations of domestic violence in prior relationships with other girlfriends. After Stacey's murder, he went to Georgetown, Texas, where he was a police officer. And in 2007, he responded to a domestic violence noise complaint. A boyfriend and girlfriend were having a dispute. The boyfriend was apparently arrested, and he took the girlfriend in his patrol car to a secluded spot and raped her. And then the dumbass had the nerve to, when she called police from her apartment when he took her back there, he apparently had the nerve to go respond to the call, and he and whoever he was partnered with tried to get her to retract the allegations on camera. She was arrested. She told the judge, and then the Williamson County court system got involved, and he was investigated. He was charged. He pled guilty. He did his time, and he was released late last year, I believe.
Okay.
This all occurred 11 years after Stacy's murder. And I would argue the experience of Stacy's murder may have been one of the things that actually soured him from that point forward.
Number 5 is, for months after the murder, Jimmy Fennell was the prime suspect in the case. A recording of one of the police investigators indicates that Fennell was suspected in the murder of Stites, motivated by her relationship with another man.
Correct. And during probably close to 8 months, he cooperated. He was interviewed multiple times. He was investigated. But one of the problems is that the truck was found in the high school parking lot in Bastrop, which is 35 miles away from where Jimmy and Stacy were living in Giddings. The truck was found at 5:23 a.m. The latest it could have been dumped there is probably around 4, because the patrol officer passed through the parking lot several times, 2 or 3 times that night, and it was on the 3rd time that he saw the truck at 5:23. It wasn't there on the prior 2 passes. And they could never find how Jimmy Fennell could have gotten 35 miles from Bastrop back to Giddings in time to get a 6:45 a.m. phone call from Carol saying that Stacy was missing, hadn't shown up for work. Now, another thing, people make a lot about the fact that HEB called Carol her mother instead of calling Jimmy her fiance. But I've known several families of police officers. And when your significant other is a police officer, you don't know what shifts he's going to work. You don't know when he's going to be home, when he's not going to be home. So an emergency contact is somebody that you know is going to be able to be available all the time. And that would be her mother.
Number 6 is Fennell's best friend at the time of the crime has now revealed that Fennell gave an inconsistent account of where he was the night of the murder.
This one is another one that is presented out of context and leaves significant statements also made by Curtis Davis to CNN completely out of the discussion, as well as ignores his testimony at a hearing in which he said, Jimmy never told me what time he got home. I was assuming it was later.
Okay.
Carol Stites, Stacy's mother, corroborates Fennell's claim that he got home at 8 o'clock because she saw him come home and go upstairs with Stacy just prior to dusk, which was 8 o'clock. Another thing that Curtis Davis says is that Jimmy Fennell could not have strangled Stacy with a belt and then dumped her body. That was something he could never have done. He also said that if Jimmy had called him and said, something happened, Stacy's dead, I need you to help me cover this up, Curtis Davis said, unequivocally, I would have arrested him.
Okay. So we just covered number 6. Now we're on 7 now. 2 witnesses have come forward in recent weeks and submitted signed affidavits that add to the mounting evidence against Jimmy Fennell. The affidavits include testimony from an insurance salesperson who stated that Fennell threatened to kill Stites while applying for life insurance. And the second witness was deputy in the Lee County Sheriff's Office at the time of the murder, who made an alarming and incriminating statement at Stites' funeral regarding her body.
Okay, these witnesses did not come forward for 23 years. Stacy's murder was a big thing in Bastrop, Lee County. It was all over the papers. In Smithville, Corpus, Bastrop, Giddings, everywhere. The allegation from the insurance salesperson is that Stacy said, oh, I'm so young. Why would I need life insurance? And Fennell's response was, if I ever catch you cheating, I'm going to kill you and no one's going to know I did it. Which really just doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense to me.
No.
I mean, I'm so young. Why do I need life insurance? Not, because I'm going to kill you and I need money.
It doesn't sound like any conversation that happens on planet Earth.
Fennell's response to Stacy's statement doesn't even make sense. It's not even in context.
Well, they got to shove in all the evidence into the, you know what I mean? All their talking points into the conversation.
The funny thing is this insurance salesperson is so afraid they do not want to be identified by name in any of the pleadings or any of the media about the case.
Interesting.
I don't know whether it's a man or a woman. Occasionally they've said he, occasionally they've said she. But again, the statement Jimmy Fennell allegedly made really doesn't make a lot of sense. And this would have been about November of 1995. But the biggest thing is that in 1996, when Stacy was murdered, when Fennell was the prime suspect, why didn't this insurance salesperson go to the Texas Rangers, Bastrop City Police, Bastrop Sheriff's Office, and report that, hey, back in November, this is what Jimmy Fennell said?
Good point.
If he or she had, there would have been the probable cause for a warrant to search Jimmy and Stacy's apartment right there. The second is a Lee County or wildlife officer. It's kind of like the stories aren't quite straight in the media because the Austin Chronicle has him as a fellow Giddings police officer, which is totally false. He says that he was with Jimmy Fennell. Jimmy was looking down at Stacy in her casket and said, "You got what you deserved." Again, there's not a lot of context for that. And again, a law enforcement officer hears such a statement about a murdered woman by her fiance and does not immediately go to the nearest Texas Ranger, Bastrop City Police, Bastrop County Sheriff's Officer and say, "Dude, look at what Jimmy just said in front of Stacy's body or to Stacy's body." Something ain't right about that. And each of these witnesses claims that what Fennell said bothered them incredibly at the time he said it, and it's bothered them for years. And yet it took them 23 years to come forward.
That is strange. So number 8 is about the time Fennell served for rape.
One more thing about that.
Okay.
They're saying he committed a crime very like Stacy's murder. Well, according to their own experts, Stacy wasn't raped and she was murdered because she was cheating. In the crime Fennell committed, first of all, the victim was a stranger to him. In fact, all the allegations that came about as a result of this investigation, which did result in charges, none of those other allegations resulted in charges. So what the Innocence Project continues to do is bootstrap allegations, uncharged allegations, unadjudicated allegations against Fennell to that single conviction 11 years after Stacy was murdered, actually. And yet the allegations against Reed, 2 of which are corroborated by DNA, don't count because he has no convictions for those crimes. And this is an example of the hypocrisy. And the biggest thing is the victim Fennell raped, he didn't kill her. He threatened her, and she didn't take his threats very seriously because she reported him, and he went to prison. And I have to say, Fennell did not claim a secret relationship with the woman. He didn't put her through a trial or cross-examination. He pled guilty. Basically what the prosecution could prove. They could prove sex with somebody in his custody. And that's what he pled guilty to. But it's a felony. He's never going to be a cop again.
And he did this while he was a cop. And what they're claiming is that Fennell was protected from being investigated more fully and from prosecution because he was a cop and it was some kind of cop conspiracy. Then what happened here? Mm-hmm. What happened here? Why wasn't he protected?
Exactly. Nobody protected him then. Right. Exactly. Nobody protected him. Williamson County came in, and I believe the Texas Rangers came in and investigated this. And 2007, I think he was arrested early in 2008, and he pled guilty in 2008. So yeah, he wasn't protected from this. And yet he was supposedly protected by officers and investigators who had no connection to him. They continue to, allege some connection. These were all his buddies. These were all his friends. But he was a Giddings police officer. He was born and raised in, I think, West Texas. So he didn't go to high school in Bastrop or Giddings or Elgin or anywhere. He didn't grow up with these guys. He didn't know these guys. They haven't even proven Rocky Wardlow, Salmela. The only two friends that are proven are Curtis Davis and David Hall. None of these other officers who were involved have ever been proven to have been friends who would have covered for Fennell if he did really kill Stacy.
Okay. And I'm going to switch number 9 and 10 around.
Okay.
This is number 10, and then we'll go to number 9. A confession by Jimmy Fennell has come to light. I'll give a little bit more information. On October 29, 2009, Arthur Snow, a former member of the Aryan Brotherhood and prison mate of Jimmy, disclosed a conversation in which Jimmy confessed to murdering Stacy Stites, stating, "I had to kill my N-word loving fiance," unquote.
Right. Okay. This was in 2019. This was October 29th, 2019. Less than 30 days before the scheduled execution of Rodney Reed on November 20th, 2019. So, suspicious much, you think?
Right.
Rodney Reed's case has been in the news quite a bit in 2014, 2015, because that's when I learned about it and started researching it. In that part of Texas, it's been in the news several times over the years because of his post-conviction claims. So why is it that Arthur Snow, who allegedly got this confession from Fennell sometime in 2009 or 2010 when they were serving in the same prison, why would he not have reported it, I don't know, like then or maybe in 2015? Arthur Snow has a long history of theft and forgery charges, all of which he's been convicted for. He's been in Texas prisons probably more than he's ever been out. He's also a member of the Aryan Brotherhood, or was a member of the Aryan Brotherhood, who has now enlightened himself and has no problem with races other than his own. But he's a forger. That means he's a liar.
Okay. And it's interesting that they're adding the Aryan Brotherhood, like that.
Correct.
Jimmy Fennell would hang around someone even if it's his cellmate, prison mate.
This is Snow's story. Well, Jimmy Fennell's supposed to be a virulent racist too, so take that for what you will. But apparently when Jimmy was in prison, he needed protection from the blacks and the Mexicans in the prison because they were bothering him. So he went to the Aryan Brotherhood. Didn't want to join him, just wanted him to watch his back. Arthur Snow is some kind of leader in the Aryan Brotherhood or something. And so they agree to protect Jimmy Fennell. Well, then it comes out that he was a former cop. And then it comes out that he was a rapist. And so eventually the Aryan Brotherhood can't protect him because he's just so reprehensible. And that's when Jimmy Fennell apparently said the Aryan Brotherhood was shaking him down for protection, which resulted in Arthur Snow taking that fall and being transferred from the prison he was in to a different prison.
Interesting.
Because they don't want the gangs kind of hanging out together in prison. And when you're identified as belonging to a certain gang, they want your ass out of there. Mm-hmm. So it's a convoluted tale if you read his declaration. So he's a forger, which is a liar, and Jimmy Fennell has gotten him in trouble, and he's been sent from one prison to another prison because of it. Could there be some sour grapes involved? He's also a domestic abuser, Arthur Snow.
Interesting.
I can't wait to see the televised hearings of this case because I'm going to have some popcorn and just laugh at these witnesses on cross-examination. They're not going to fare well.
No. I don't.
I promise you.
I don't think so either. So this is number 9, but we're concluding. We moved number 10 and number 9 around.
Yeah.
I'd like to conclude with this one. This case was racially charged. Reed, a black man, was found guilty of murdering Stites, a white woman, by an all-white jury.
In reality, when you look at the comments and you look at the different pages and discussions and social media, the only people really making it about race are Rodney Reed and his family and supporters. I've never made it about race. I've never mentioned his race or attached any meaning to his race or her race or mine. But yet, when you don't agree that he's innocent, you are a racist.
I can attest to that. I've been called a racist for making episodes about this case.
You know, I've said it before. I believe if Rodney Reed was white, Hispanic, Asian, he would be no different than this Rodney Reed. He would be a narcissist. He would be out to get whatever he can get from whoever he can get it from. And he would be a serial rapist and pedophile that's willing to lie to get his own ass out of trouble, who feels the world is out to get him. And the world being out to get Rodney Reed goes back to his school days. Because when he had problems in school, it wasn't him. It was the teachers that were out to get him.
Interesting. And we were talking before we started recording, and I was talking about the supporters, and you were saying they were very similar to the West Memphis 3 supporters, particularly Damien Echols supporters. How so?
I feel that they are all invested in him being innocent. Mm-hmm. And so they can't handle anything that could disabuse them of that notion. And so they just want to ignore anything that doesn't agree with their worldview. And that's how that's how Jeffrey MacDonald supporters are. They want to hang on to the irrelevant conspiracy theories rather than look at the cold, hard facts, not only what was developed at the trial, but what was developed since the trial. And they don't want to look at how things don't add up or make sense, such as the fact that nobody reported a relationship between Stacey and Reed during the 10 months prior to Reed being identified. They just say, well, everybody was afraid to say anything because he was black and she was white. And yet people aren't afraid to say anything now. They were afraid to say anything to the authorities in 1996, but they'll talk to Ryan Polomsky for his documentaries. He only had one person who didn't want to be identified. And the problem with not wanting to be identified and not wanting to testify is that whatever you know is never going to become a part of the court record. And that's another problem is the supporters would rather rely on the extrajudicial information, social media, quote documentaries, media articles, rather than look at the court opinions. There are 21 years of post-conviction litigation opinions. Only direct appeal, which I do have a copy of, and the 2 initial state writs are unreported. Every decision since then has been reported. There's a 180-page federal habeas opinion or report and recommendation that analyzes the case up through about 2009 and explains meticulously why Reed's claims didn't succeed. And they won't read it. They don't want to hear it because he has to be innocent for them. Because that fits with their worldview rather than he's a serial rapist who brutally murdered a 19-year-old woman 18 days before her wedding.
And it also has to do with your identity too. I'm a fighter for justice. I'm a fighter for truth. And if these things are true, then I'm fighting for a serial murderer, pedophile release, right?
Exactly. But they don't want to see him that way. They don't want to face that fact. And they don't want to face the evidence that proves that fact.
And also, I don't think they want to do the work, too, of just reading these court documents. It's a lot of time. You have to invest a lot of time, right? I mean, or some time. I think you should if you're advocating for someone, but
that's how I've always approached it. I invest the time. And if I don't want to do the work, Meredith Kircher, it's not that I don't want to do the work. It's that I feel overwhelmed with all the stuff I'm already doing. But, Meredith Kircher, Nexium, I don't really get into discussion of those things because I don't know enough to form too many opinions. I mean, I think Amanda Knox is guilty. Don't get me wrong. But, I don't have enough information to intelligently discuss.
Well, you certainly covered this case and read the documents really in a first-rate manner, in my opinion. And so this Tuesday, you have an episode coming up about this case and part 1 of
Correct.
Part 2. It's on Clear and Convincing Podcast, Blog Talk Radio. What time?
We are 8 p.m. Central. We're having 2 special episodes this Tuesday and Wednesday, the 19th and the 20th. On the 19th, I'm going to go through the prior claims that are being used now. For example, the allegation that Fennell said he was going to strangle Stacey with a belt if he ever caught her cheating on him. That's a claim that's been raised. It's been presented to court, and it's been found to be not credible or reliable by a court. So I'm going to go through those sort of things, the failure to search the apartment, returning the car to Fennell, all those things, and kind of counterpoint those claims as well as all the other claims he's made. And then on Wednesday, we'll be talking to Robert Phillips, who was the defense attorney for Jimmy Fennell in the 2007 rape case.
Oh, interesting.
He appeared on Dr. Phil. He's appeared on a few other interviews with KVUE and I think KXAN a few times. So he's going to be joining us. I've also got an open invitation to Stacy's family and Jimmy Fennell's family. If they want to contact us, they can. I don't know how to get in touch with her sisters or her mother. Jimmy Fennell's aunt is a member of one of the pages that I'm on. And I've, given her an open invitation, but I'm not going to push her to do anything she's not comfortable doing. Reed's supporters, especially his family, they were harassing KVUE because they didn't like KVUE's recent report. They made it look like Reed was more guilty than innocent.
Oh, I wonder how that happened.
Yeah, well, they came out. Apparently one of them watched it and was incensed. And so then they start sending all the little minions. I used to use that term for Damien Eccles supporters, and Rodney Reed supporters are minions. But they're not cute and they're not funny.
No.
Like the guys, and I used Minions before Minions were even invented. So Disney or Imagination or Pixar, they owe me something.
Okay. So that's this Tuesday, this Wednesday, this week?
Tuesday and Wednesday this week, correct.
8 o'clock, what is it?
8 p.m.
Central Time.
Correct.
Blog Talk Radio,
correct.
Clear and Convincing Podcast. Lisa O'Brien, thank you so much for talking to me about this case.